What is the mission of DoD's Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office? What is the Tradewinds marketplace? How do Tradewinds acquisitions differ from traditional acquisitions? And what does the future hold for the Tradewinds marketplace at DoD? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Bonnie Evangelista, Acting Deputy Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer for Acquisition within DoD's Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office. Would you tell us more about the mission of your office, the Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office, CDAO, within the U.S. Department of Defense? What prompted its creation, and how does it effectively support the overall mission of the department?
Yeah, I'll say simply put, we are trying to do digital AI, ML, and data at scale. And the department's trying to figure out basically how to, I would say, accelerate adoption of cutting edge technologies. And especially in this AI age we are in, that requires a lot of different types of thinking. So that simply put, it's how do we do not just AI, but digital and data, because you can't do AI without the other two. And how do you do that at scale? But in terms of how CDAO was formed, I have to give a little history lesson, if that's okay. And it's not a long history lesson because all of this, CDAO in itself is only 2 years old. My former organization, though, is called the JAIC, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. And CDAO is made up of 4 different organizations or parts of the department that have come together to form the CDAO. So the JAIC was formed around I believe it was the 2018, 2019 timeframe, and I joined the JAIC around the 2021 timeframe. And it was within the JAIC that Congress mandated acquisition authority. So that's where we come in. It might be odd to have an organization that sits in the Office of Secretary of Defense with acquisition authority. It didn't happen by happenstance, I would say, but it came from the JAIC. And the JAIC's mission was accelerate AI and get it into hands of warfighters as fast as possible. So that's what we focused on. And I think the genesis of the CDAO realized that the JAIC was missing other pieces in order to do adoption and acceleration. So that's where the other pieces or the other components or organizations within the department came together. So it was the JAIC, the Chief Data Office, as well as the Defense Digital Services Organization, and then the Advana program all came together, which was a data analytics platform, all came together, started storming and norming to figure out like can we take the goodness and the things that we were all doing separately, and can we now look at it holistically in order to form a picture for the department and to start providing or pathfinding for the department.
So Bonnie, what are your specific duties and responsibilities within the CDAO?
I specifically in the acquisitions directorate, which again is very unique. They're outside of the services. There are only 2 other organizations that have acquisition authority, and that's Cyber Command and SOCOM, Special Operations Command. So these are combatant commands that have have acquisition authority outside of the services, and we are now the 3rd to join them. And I believe, again, this is a little bit before my time at the JAIC, but I believe the intent was there was awareness or recognition that because things are moving so quickly with emerging technology, that we needed acquisition professionals to add new plays to our acquisition playbook, I would say. We needed new either mental models or new mindsets to think about the institutional acquisition discipline and how to apply that, or how to, as AFRL, Air Force Research Labs CIO likes to say, how do you reduce toil? How do you calculate that to begin with? And then how do you figure out where your return on investments are? For us in the JAIC, the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, we really, really focused, instead of saying like, how do we reduce our toil, but we did say, how do we remove as much red tape as possible? How do you get a workflow to its simplest form and really question every part of the process, because not everyone has that luxury to do that in their mission spaces. So fortunately, we were given that mission space. So in the acquisition directorate, we're not just simply delivering capabilities for certain mission requirements. We are trying to actively and intentionally think about, how do I encourage more problem solving, not necessarily requirements compliance? And then how do I do that in the fastest way possible? Like, can I imagine a world where we do same day contracts, as an example? And whether that is seemingly impossible or actually possible, like, we explore that and we go experiment new possible methodologies to make that possible and see what happens.
Yeah, I was wondering if we could transition more to your portfolio. And I'm thinking maybe you could highlight for us some of the key priorities, strategic priorities you're focused on. And have any, internal drivers or external trends sort of shape how you take your role in your portfolio and move it forward and sort of champion this idea of accelerated acquisition?
Mm-hmm. Strategic priorities include giving CDAO as much stability and foundations in acquisition as much as possible while delivering, and then also leaving room for experimentation. And this is both on both sides of not just acquisition of AI, but AI for acquisition, if that makes sense. We're leaving room for experimentation on both of those fronts, I would say. So we do have a lot of intention around how do we execute some of these big strategic initiatives for the entirety of the organization, and making sure we just spent a lot of time talking about talent and people, and making sure people with the right mindsets, skills, and abilities can deliver upon those things. And also, how do we still leave room and not let experimentation be an afterthought? So making sure right now we have our own, I would say, innovation cell inside the acquisition directorate. This cell is going to take ownership of our Tradewinds initiative and our Tradewinds platform and the strategic direction of that, and hopefully continue to build new plays in the playbook for the acquisition community, and then working with our OSD partners to ensure when we find goodness that we can share that with everybody and start to really sink our teeth into what does adoption at scale look like, especially when we believe we have new models that can have great impact across the department. And at the same time, there are actual possible capabilities that CDAO is going to essentially take ownership of, maybe in the beginning, maybe not as an enduring capability, but depending on the mission space or what's going on in emerging technology, there are some equities here that CDAO is going to maybe pathfind, and assuring that we have the proper execution teams to support that.
That's great. I want to transition to the actual something you're really involved in, and that's Tradewinds. I was hoping you could tell us, what is Tradewinds, how was it conceived, and how does it seek to enable the department to buy faster, better, and smarter?
Tradewinds is it's a suite of tools and services, is the most simplest way to explain it. And its genesis, again, coming from the Jake, it was something that was started even before I got there. The vision was, can we create an environment that allows for play in all parts of the acquisition lifecycle? We strategically started with contracting because that's arguably the most criticized part of the acquisition process, but it's also the part that can make or break your acquisition strategy. If you don't, I think a lot of us can understand, whether you're a program manager or any other part of the acquisition team, you are likely spending a lot of your time talking about contracts and the success of your contracts, because, as I like to say, all roads lead to contracts. I don't care what part of the acquisition lifecycle you're on. At some point, delivery is dependent on contracts. So getting contracting right and focused is really, really important. And we believe that in the Jake. So when the Tradewinds initiative started, at first there were lots of, I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of kind of the ideation that went behind it, And there was a little bit of an evolution because I believe some of the early Tradewinds experimentation that was happening. And again, think of experimentation from a business model perspective, less about I took a tool and I put it in a sandbox kind of thing. We're talking ways of doing business. Like we were looking at business processes or business methodologies that could help acquisition professionals either go faster or reduce friction. And it really wasn't until maybe a year and a half after Tradewinds started that we kind of hit the point of how can I make this like even better? And the ideation the imagination within the ideation got a lot better, I would say. And right now, the premier offering that we have under Tradewinds is called the Solutions Marketplace, where our goal was to be as flexible as possible for a contracting or acquisition professional to just buy a solution to a mission need or an operational gap as fast as possible. Not saying that that is the solution to every acquisition problem in the world, but in this day and age with emerging technology, sometimes that pace is required. And can we give them an accelerated pathway to choose solution A because it has merit and initiate either a pilot or some kind of agreement as fast as possible? And so the marketplace does that. It's basically a combination of what's called a commercial solutions opening, and we're leveraging multiple authorities and regulations to satisfy competition standards for multiple contracting instruments. And we're also giving, I would say, small businesses and startups a lower barrier to entry because all we're asking for in the proposal process is a 5-minute video solution to how their offering or product or service is solving a department problem. And we have a published assessment process to assess whether that video solution does indeed have technical merit. And if in doing so, it's rated favorably, it becomes what we call awardable in our marketplace. And the marketplace is what we consider a post-competition environment. So we've checked the competition box for multiple authorities and regulations. We call this stacking authorities, a creative use of stacking authorities to be specific, so that a government buyer that just needs a solution to a problem can pick vendor A in the marketplace on the basis of competition, and they can either do a demo, do any other due diligence they would like to do. But if they need to go fast, they can go fast and just execute a contractual instrument of multiple types, I would say. You can do federal acquisition regulation based contracting or non-FAR based contracting, whatever you get to choose your oyster, I would say.
A good point, because I was wondering about, when you think about acquisition, and you've mentioned a couple of terminologies here. You mentioned the FAR, you got DFAR for the defense, you have OTAs, other transaction authorities. I'm wondering, as I was prepping for conversing with you, I was thinking, how does the Tradewinds, and you may have been alluding to it, Bonnie, but how does a Tradewinds acquisition differ from, say, traditional acquisition? And maybe you could spend a little time getting into the contracting authorities that cover the Tradewinds approach.
Yeah. So the biggest part that weirds people out, and when I say weirds them out, it's because they're just not used to it. There's not a lot of training around this. And so unless you're in a mission space that requires you to do something different, you just may have never heard of this or seen this before. And there's an instant freak out moment because you're not sure if this is okay, or usually because we're very compliance oriented in our fields. There is something out there called the Competition and Contracting Act. And under this, Congress has mandated that everything that the federal government, this is federal government wide, not just DoD, Department of Defense, but everything we are spending taxpayer dollars on must be competed openly and fairly. And I'm going to ignore the part where there's 10 exceptions to that rule for a second. But just understand that's the standard. When you're doing contracting compliant with the Federal Acquisition Regulation, that's the competition standard. Most of us are really programmed really well to know and understand that rule and to make sure we know and understand the exceptions to that rule and what is and is not appropriate. The solutions marketplace does not necessarily follow CICA or the Competition and Contracting Act. We are leveraging two authorities and regulations in particular, where the competition standard is slightly different, and it's a merit-based competition. It is not everything's full and open, what we would call full and open competition on the CICA side. So the authorities that we are compliant with the competition standards are, one actually is a FAR-based regulation. It's FAR Part 35, where there are procedures for broad agency announcements. So these procedures are specific to basic and applied research. These are well-established rules and regulations. So there's nothing new there, but we've made sure that the general solicitation that is published on sam.gov, which is the government point of entry for all government solicitations, is designed and compliant with the rules of competition for broad agency announcement procedures. The other two are similar to broad agency announcement procedures, but are not the same. Other transaction authorities, which you mentioned. So this is a congressionally mandated authority where the competition standard is competition to the maximum extent practicable. This basically means you have broad discretion and interpretation on how to design or execute your competition. So we're leveraging that to use a BAA, broad agency announcement, or commercial solutions opening type model. So the third authority is now a DFARS, Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement, in Part 12 called the Commercial Solutions Opening. This is also very similar to broad agency announcement procedures. They're both merit-based. The only difference between the two, and difference in, I would say, in practice, not in procedures or regulation, is BAAs are for basic and applied research. CSOs can be for anything commercial. So you're not limited in the type of funds necessarily or type of technology readiness level of the solutions. When you're using commercial solutions opening, you can use other types of money or more mature, ready for market type solutions under a CSO. But the procedures look very, very similar to each other. So we're using the CSO procedures as a solicitation methodology for the other transaction authority, if you can follow my logic there.
Before I close, I was wondering if you could tell us, what does the future hold in your mind for Tradewinds Marketplace and for the CDAO?
For Tradewinds Marketplace, I think briefly mentioned before, I think we've gone beyond a proof of concept, and we are showing the increased demand, especially on the industry side. The positive feedback and recognition we're getting from industry representatives, even through Congress. Like I've seen congressional testimony where some companies are referring to the solutions marketplace. Like I think that type of demand signal is real and is growing. We just recently, I would say, have some big companies who submitted their video solutions. So it's showing, I think there's a real need for this type of methodology. And where we have some work to do on the government side, because a marketplace is a two-sided thing. You have to have suppliers and buyers. And we are trying to make sure that the buying community is as well informed as possible to leverage and optimize the marketplace in the way that we know it can be used. And that's the part where I see the growth. There is more to do with our partners across the department to make sure there is an understanding of not just how to use either FAR or non-FAR based contractual instruments in accordance with the way we've designed the marketplace under the general solicitation, but it's also awareness making, because the department's not very good at letting other parts of the department know about what's going on. So making sure we're being very bold in our awareness campaign as well.
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Bonnie Evangelista, Acting Deputy Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Officer for Acquisition in DoD's Chief Digital and Artificial Intelligence Office. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership, technology, and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at iTunes, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app. And as always, at businessofgovernment.org.